I never thought a war zone would feel safer than my own hometown. But life has a cruel way of teaching you where the real battles are. My name's Aaron Mitchell, 35 years old, Staff Sergeant in the U.S. Army. I've done tours in Afghanistan, Iraq, and a dozen other places Uncle Sam thought needed my attention. I've slept under stars in deserts, waded through jungles thick with mosquitoes, and stood guard in mountain passes colder than death itself. But none of those places, none of those missions, prepared me for the ambush that waited for me back home. Not from insurgents or snipers, but from something far more absurd and infuriating. My very own homeowners association. The story begins the year I shipped out for my third deployment. Before leaving, I made sure everything was squared away. My truck was in storage, my bill set on auto pay, and my piece of land, the property I inherited from my grandfather, was locked up, fenced, and legally documented as mine. It wasn't much, just a few acres on the edge of a suburban development that sprung up during a housing boom. My grandfather bought it back in the 60s, long before the subdivision even existed. He used to take me hunting there, and when he passed, it was all he left me. I had plans for that land. Someday I wanted to build a cabin, maybe retire there, away from the madness of military life. Now, here's the thing. My land wasn't empty. Sure, there wasn't a house on it, but it was far from vacant. I had a small storage shed with tools, some equipment covered by tarps, even a little garden patch my buddy checked on for me. Most importantly, it was mine, paid for, deeded, and untouchable. Or so I thought. Halfway through my deployment, I got a strange letter forwarded through my military mail. It was from a real estate agency I didn't recognize, congratulating me on the successful closing of the sale of my land. At first, I thought it had to be a scam. I hadn't sold anything. I hadn't authorized anything. My stomach churned as I read the details. Apparently, the HOA of the subdivision bordering my property had claimed my land was abandoned and vacant. According to their twisted logic, it fell under their control. They sold it off to a developer who wanted to expand the neighborhood. I nearly laughed at the absurdity of it. How could an HOA, a bunch of self-appointed neighborhood busybodies, think they had the authority to sell something that clearly didn't belong to them? But the laughter didn't last. The more I read, the more I realized this was a joke. There were signatures, fake documents, and county records that showed the land was no longer listed under my name. Somehow, they'd managed to grease enough palms or file enough fraudulent paperwork to make it official on paper. My land was gone. On deployment. There's a certain discipline you develop. You can't just lose your head, no matter how bad the news is. People rely on you to stay sharp, keep your cool, and finish the mission. So I swallowed my anger, shoved the letter into my pack, and went back to work. But at night, when the gunfire died down and the desert went quiet, I lay awake staring at the stars, thinking about that land, thinking about my grandfather, about how he told me, "This land is yours, Aaron. No one can take it from you." And now, somehow, a group of suburban paper pushers had done exactly that. By the time my deployment ended and I touched back down on American soil, the fire in my chest had grown into a full inferno. I didn't rush straight to the HOA office or the developer's fancy building downtown. No, first I drove out to my land, or what used to be mine. What I found made my blood boil hotter than any desert sun. The fence was torn down. My shed was gone, bulldozed into splinters. The garden patch was flattened, the earth scraped raw by heavy machinery. And in its place, survey markers, bulldozers, and signs that read, "Future site of Willow Creek Subdivision, Phase 4. That was when I made a promise to myself. I wasn't going to let this stand. I didn't fight overseas, didn't bleed and sweat in deserts and mountains, just to come home and be robbed by a smug HOA president in pearls and a pencil skirt. They thought I'd roll over, take the loss, maybe file a weak lawsuit I couldn't afford. They thought wrong. They had underestimated me, underestimated the one thing the military had drilled into my bones. Never leave a man, or in this case, a piece of land behind. I started small. I went to the county office, demanded answers. The clerks gave me shrugs and excuses. "Everything's in order," they said, pointing to stacks of paperwork stamped and notarized. When I asked to see the signatures, I nearly tore the desk apart. My name was there, scrawled in ink I'd never touched. A forgery so sloppy even a rookie cop could have spotted it, and yet somehow it had slid through the system. Next, I confronted the HOA directly. Their president, a sharp-faced woman named Linda Carter, met me in the subdivision's clubhouse like I was some trespasser begging for scraps. "Sergeant Mitchell," she said with a smile as fake as her documents. "I'm afraid you're mistaken. That land was vacant, and under our bylaws, vacant land adjacent to Willow Creek falls under the association's jurisdiction." I wanted to laugh, but my fists clenched instead. "Lady," I told her, "there's a difference between vacant and valuable, and you knew damn well it wasn't yours." Her smile never faltered. "You were overseas. We assumed you'd abandoned it." Abandoned? That word burned hotter than napalm in my gut. I hadn't abandoned anything. I had been serving my country while they served themselves. I walked out of that clubhouse knowing I couldn't fight them in court alone. Lawyers cost money, and developers had plenty of it. But I had something they didn't. Connections, brothers and sisters in uniform, people who understood loyalty, justice, and payback. And as I looked back at the subdivision spreading like a virus across what used to be my land, I decided the battlefield had simply shifted. I might have left the desert, but my next mission had just begun, right here in my own hometown. When you spent years in the military, you learn that wars aren't always fought with bullets. Some battles are about information, about pressure, about making the right move at the right time. Coming back home and realizing my land had been stolen, I knew this wasn't just about property. It was about principle. I wasn't going to let a group of smug HOA board members decide my future. But I also knew I couldn't go in swinging blindly. No, if I was going to win this, I had to treat it like a mission. And missions start with reconnaissance. So I watched. Every day for the first 2 weeks back, I drove by my land, or what used to be my land, and observed. Construction crews were busy grading soil, running pipes, laying foundations. Families drove by with real estate brochures in hand, pointing at the future home sites banners with excitement. Linda Carter, the HOA president, strutted around the site occasionally, talking to the developer's suits like she was queen of the castle. They all thought this was a done deal, but I was patient. I knew the value of patience better than anyone. You don't rush into a minefield. You chart every inch before you step. At night, I dug through county records. I spent hours in the clerk's office, flipping through property deeds, tax filings, and HOA bylaws. It was a maze of paperwork designed to confuse, but I had something most people didn't. The patience to sift through the noise until the signal came through. And it did. I discovered that Linda and the HOA had filed their fraudulent claim during the exact week my unit had been deployed to a high-risk zone overseas. They knew I wouldn't be around to contest it. They timed their move to strike when I was at my weakest, serving my country thousands of miles away. That realization hardened my resolve. This wasn't a mistake. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was theft, calculated and deliberate. And that meant I didn't have to feel bad about what came next. I called up an old friend, Lieutenant Marcus Hill. Marcus and I had served together in Afghanistan. He was sharp, loyal, and just cynical enough about civilian life to understand what I was dealing with. When I told him what happened, he let out a low whistle. "So they stole your land while you were deployed? That's low, even for an HOA." "Low doesn't cover it," I said. "They bulldozed my shed, flattened my garden, and now they're selling lots like it was theirs to begin with." Marcus chuckled darkly. "Sounds like they don't realize who they're messing with." That was the moment I said out loud, the plan that had been brewing in the back of my mind since I'd first seen those survey markers. I want the subdivision repossessed. There was silence on the line for a moment, then Marcus laughed. "You're insane, but I like it." We started small. Marcus put me in touch with a JAG officer he knew, someone who understood military property rights and how federal protections apply to servicemen. The JAG confirmed what I suspected. Under the Service Member Civil Relief Act, I was supposed to be protected from exactly this kind of predatory nonsense while deployed. The HOA had no authority to touch my land, much less sell it. What they did wasn't just unethical, it was illegal. That gave me my first weapon, legality. But I wanted more than a lawsuit. I wanted to make a point so sharp the entire community would feel it. I wanted them to know that you don't steal from a soldier and walk away smiling. So Marcus and I started pulling strings. He reached out to buddies still on active duty, engineers, logistics guys, even a colonel who owed him a favor. I made a few calls to veterans I knew, men and women who'd had enough of being kicked around by bureaucrats and petty tyrants. And slowly, a plan started to take shape. A plan to turn the table so completely that Linda Carter and her HOA would wish they'd never heard my name. The first strike was psychological. I filed a formal complaint with the county, attaching the forged documents and demanding an investigation. The county had to take it seriously, especially with my military service on record. That alone sent ripples through the subdivision. Rumors started to fly. Maybe the sale wasn't valid. Maybe the new development was illegal. Home buyers got nervous. Realtors whispered about lawsuits. Construction slowed, then stopped entirely while the developer tried to assure everyone that everything was fine. But that was just the beginning. The next move was more visible. With the help of Marcus and a few other buddies, I arranged for a military convoy to visit the subdivision under the pretense of conducting a training exercise. You've never seen panic until you've seen HOA board members watch Humvees and uniformed soldiers roll down their freshly paved streets, setting up temporary barriers and marking off lots with bright orange tape. We didn't break any laws. We coordinated everything with local authorities, who were more than happy to let us use the area. After all, I had paperwork showing the land was still under dispute, which meant technically it was off limits for development. The look on Linda's face when she came out of her McMansion to confront us was priceless. "What is the meaning of this?" she shrieked, heels clicking furiously on the pavement. "Ma'am," one of the soldiers replied calmly, "this is disputed federal property under review. We're here to secure it until ownership is clarified." Her jaw dropped. "This is private property." "Negative, ma'am," the soldier said. "This land is tied to a service member currently under federal protection. Until the investigation concludes, it falls under military jurisdiction." I didn't even have to say a word. I just stood there, arms crossed, watching her sputter and rage like a tea kettle ready to blow. For once, she wasn't the one in control. Neighbors came out of their houses, staring wide-eyed as soldiers roped off areas, parked vehicles, and set up signs that read, "Federal property, no trespassing." The subdivision that had once been her pride and joy now looked like a restricted zone. Buyers canceled their contracts. Developers pulled their workers. And within a week, the entire project was frozen. But I wasn't done. Not by a long shot. I dug deeper into the HOA's records. With the help of a veteran buddy who worked in cybersecurity, I uncovered emails between Linda and the developer that made it clear this was a coordinated land grab. They knew the risks. They knew the sale wasn't legal. And they did it anyway, banking on the fact that I'd be too far away or too broke to fight back. Those emails were dynamite. I packaged them neatly, attached them to my county complaint, and forwarded copies to the local news. The story blew up. Headlines screamed, "HOA accused of selling deployed soldiers' land." News vans parked outside the subdivision, interviewing angry neighbors who put deposits down on lots now in limbo. Linda tried to spin it, claiming the land was abandoned, but nobody was buying it. The public was firmly on my side. After all, who were they going to sympathize with? A soldier who served overseas or a greedy HOA president who sold land out from under him? The pressure mounted. The developer threatened to sue the HOA for fraud. The county launched an investigation into their practices. And all the while, my military occupation of the subdivision continued, a constant reminder that this wasn't over. Through it all, I kept my cool. Because this wasn't just revenge, it was justice. Every step I took was measured, precise, and backed by either law or military support. Linda and her cronies had no defense. They thought they could steal from me while I was fighting for my country. Now I was back, and I was fighting for myself. And I was winning. But the war wasn't over yet. What came next would be the decisive strike, the move that would not only get my land back, but bring the entire crooked operation crashing down for good. If there's one thing I learned overseas, it's that a war isn't won with a single strike. You can win a battle, but the enemy doesn't quit just because they've been knocked down once. They regroup, they plot, and they come back harder. That's exactly what Linda and her HOA tried to do after the news broke. For a week or two, it looked like the subdivision was finished. The developers froze operations, the buyers vanished, and the county had opened an investigation that made every HOA board member sweat through their suits. But then the counterattack came, wrapped in polite words and sharpened like knives. First, I got a letter from their attorney. Pages and pages of legal jargon accusing me of trespassing, interfering with commercial contracts, and defamation. They demanded I withdraw my complaint, remove the soldiers from the property, and publicly apologize. Reading it felt almost comical. They were accusing me, the legal owner of the land, of trespassing on my own soil. It was absurd, but I knew better than to laugh it off. In America, money buys lawyers, and lawyers buy time. They were trying to drag me into a war of attrition, hoping I'd burn out or run out of cash. But here's where they miscalculated. I wasn't alone. I had the army. I had veterans. I had an entire community of people who saw this as more than just a land dispute. It was a matter of respect for every service member who'd ever been screwed over by bureaucracy back home. So I brought their letter to JAG, and within days, I had a counter-response drafted that tore their claims apart like tissue paper. Trespassing? Impossible. I had proof of ownership predating the subdivision. Interference? No. I was protecting disputed property. Defamation? Truth is a defense. And I had emails to prove everything I said. Their threats fell flat before they even left the launch pad. Still, I knew the legal side wouldn't be enough. Linda was too stubborn to back down just because the law wasn't on her side. She thrived on control, on intimidation, and as long as she had her little kingdom in that subdivision, she'd keep trying to claw back her power. If I wanted this to end, I needed to break not just her case, but her grip on the neighborhood itself. And for that, I needed something bigger. That's when Marcus called me one night with an idea. Aaron, he said, what if we don't just fight them in court? What if we turn this whole subdivision into a lesson they'll never forget? I raised an eyebrow even though he couldn't see me. What do you mean? Think about it, he replied. They tried to repossess your land, so you repossess theirs. Not permanently. Legally, you can't, but temporarily. With enough pressure, enough presence, you can make that subdivision feel like it belongs to you, not them. And believe me, the Army's got plenty of ways to make that happen without breaking a single law. The more I thought about it, the more I liked it. It wasn't enough to freeze their project. I wanted them to feel the same helplessness I'd felt. Standing there watching my shed bulldoze, my land carved up by people who thought they had the right. I wanted them to see their manicured streets and perfect lawns turn into something they couldn't control. And I wanted them to know it was me who made it happen. So I made the call. Within weeks, we had approval for a full-scale training exercise in the area. Trucks rolled in, not just a handful this time, but convoys. Portable command tents went up on the lots where houses were supposed to be. Soldiers ran drills through the cul-de-sacs, practicing urban maneuvers. Helicopters thundered overhead at dawn, rattling windows and waking up the neighborhood. For 3 straight days, Willow Creek Subdivision looked less like a gated community and more like a forward operating base in Kandahar. Linda lost her mind. She stormed out her house, screaming at soldiers, demanding they leave. They didn't even blink. Ma'am, this is a federal training exercise authorized by local authorities. They repeated calmly. She threatened lawsuits, called the mayor, even tried to get the sheriff involved. But the sheriff was a veteran himself, and when he heard my story, he told her flat out, "Lady, this man bled for this country. You stole his land. You're lucky all he's doing is running drills." Neighbors who once bowed to her every whim now started questioning her judgment. They saw soldiers in uniform shaking hands with me, treating me with respect. They saw the news crews that returned to cover the military occupation of Willow Creek. And slowly they started to shift. Instead of whispering about me being a troublemaker, they whispered about her being a fraud, a tyrant who had dragged them all into a mess. But while the subdivision simmered, I dug deeper. With the help of my cyber-savvy buddy, I uncovered financial records showing that Linda hadn't just orchestrated the land grab. She'd profited personally. Kickbacks from the developer, consulting fees funneled through a shell company, even HOA funds misused for her own luxury purchases. It was all there, black and white. And when I turned that evidence over to the county investigators, it was like dropping a bomb on her entire empire. The county froze the HOA's bank accounts. The developer severed ties, calling her toxic. Neighbors demanded her resignation. And yet, she still clung to power, still tried to paint me as a villain. "He's destabilizing our community," she shouted at one emergency HOA meeting, her voice cracking with desperation. "He's turning our homes into a war zone." But the truth was undeniable. The war zone wasn't my doing, it was hers. She'd started this fight when she sold my land. I was just finishing it. The breaking point came when a group of soldiers helped me set up a flagpole on the disputed property and raise the American flag over it. We held a small ceremony. Nothing flashy, just a handful of veterans, neighbors, and local reporters. But that image, a soldier standing tall on his land, flag waving overhead, while the HOA president fumed helplessly, was a final nail in her coffin. It went viral online, spreading far beyond our county. People all over the country saw it and knew the story. A soldier coming home to find his land stolen and taking it back with the very strength he'd honed overseas. By the time the county issued its preliminary ruling, recognizing me as the rightful owner and invalidating the HOA's fraudulent sale, Linda's reign was over. She was facing criminal charges. Her allies had abandoned her, and her once pristine subdivision was now a cautionary tale for every HOA in America. But I wasn't celebrating yet, because I knew Linda well enough to know she wouldn't go down quietly. And I wasn't about to underestimate her again. If you ever face someone like Linda, you know they don't vanish just because the law catches up. People like her thrive on control, and when you rip that away, they claw for scraps of influence in the shadows. She was facing charges, her reputation was shredded, and the county had ruled in my favor, yet somehow she still found a way to stir the pot. It started small. Anonymous letters slipped into mailboxes, calling me a bully, and warning neighbors that having military exercises nearby was dangerous. Then came the whispers at the grocery store, the sideways glares in town, the quiet but persistent attempt to paint me as some kind of rogue soldier who had abused his service for revenge. I didn't mind the gossip. I fought insurgents overseas who relied on rumors just as much as rifles. What bothered me was that Linda had nothing left to lose, and desperate people are the most dangerous. When the county froze the HOA's accounts, she found out that a few contractors still had unpaid balances. Somehow, she convinced one of them, a hot-headed demolition guy with more brawn than brains, that I was responsible for his unpaid bill. One night, I came home to find the tires on my truck slashed and my shed spray painted with the words thief in bright red. I knew immediately whose hand was behind it. But here's the thing about being a soldier. Retaliation is only effective when it's strategic. If I lashed out impulsively, I'd prove her right in the eyes of anyone still on the fence. So instead of confronting her directly, I started documenting everything. Photos, videos, time-stamped reports. I had learned in the Army that intelligence wins wars. While she was scrambling to create chaos, I was quietly building an ironclad case that would crush her once and for all. At the same time, I focused on the community. When the subdivision first turned into a battlefield, literally and figuratively, the neighbors had been terrified. They didn't know who to trust. But now that the dust was settling, I saw an opportunity. I began attending their emergency meetings, not as an enemy, but as a neighbor. I wore plain clothes, no uniform, no bravado. I told them plainly, look, I didn't want this fight. I didn't ask for my land to be stolen. But I'm not here to destroy your homes. I'm here to make sure justice is done. Slowly, the walls came down. One by one, people who'd once crossed the street to avoid me started nodding, then waving, then speaking. A retired teacher told me she'd always thought Linda was too power-hungry. A young mother confessed that Linda had fined her thousands for having the wrong color flowers in her yard. An older man admitted he joined the HOA board only because he was afraid of what Linda would do if he didn't. Their stories poured out like a dam breaking, and with every confession, the image of Linda as a leader crumbled further. Meanwhile, the military exercises had left a strange mark on Willow Creek. Kids now played soldier in the cul-de-sacs, mimicking the drills they'd watched. Local businesses put up signs thanking veterans. The sheriff even told me that crime had dipped in the area during the training days. Apparently, criminals don't like operating in neighborhoods full of Humvees. The subdivision was no longer just Linda's failed empire. It had become a symbol of resistance, a place where people realized they didn't have to live under her thumb anymore. Of course, Linda couldn't stand that. When her smear campaign failed to turn the tide, she tried something bolder. She hired a lawyer, another one, since her first had dropped her, and filed a motion demanding that the county reverse its decision. Her argument? That the land was abandoned during my deployment and that by community necessity, the HOA had the right to reallocate it. It was laughable, but it forced another hearing. And in that hearing, she pulled out her last card, fake witnesses. One by one, a few neighbors stood up and claimed they'd seen me ignore the property for years, that I agreed to sell informally, that I'd threatened people with soldiers. It was a circus, and for a brief moment, I felt the old frustration bubbling up, the same helpless anger I'd felt when I first saw my land bulldozed. But then my lawyer, with a calmness that reminded me of a sniper waiting for the perfect shot, dismantled them piece by piece. We had photos of me maintaining the land before deployment. We had emails proving no agreement was ever made. We had military orders showing exactly why I couldn't be physically present. And as for threatening people, we had video of every single exercise, showing soldiers behaving professionally, following rules, never once intimidating anyone. By the time the hearing ended, the judge was visibly irritated with Linda's antics. Her witnesses had been caught lying under oath. Her evidence was non-existent, and her credibility was in tatters. The ruling was swift. The land was mine, the sale was void, and the HOA had no authority to act as it had. On top of that, the judge recommended that Linda's conduct be referred for further criminal investigation. When the gavel came down, I felt something I hadn't in a long time. Peace. Not triumph, not gloating, just peace. Because this wasn't just about me anymore. It was about every neighbor who had been bullied, every soldier who'd come home to find their sacrifices disrespected, every homeowner who'd been chewed up by a system designed to enrich a few at the expense of many. But Linda wasn't finished, not yet. As she left the courtroom, she turned to me, her eyes burning with venom, and hissed, "This isn't over. You'll regret this." Maybe it was a threat. Maybe it was just desperation. Either way, I knew one thing for certain. If she wanted to come at me again, she'd be walking into a battlefield I was more than ready for. There's a saying I picked up during my deployment. Wars don't end, they just change shape. You might win the ground, sign the papers, and raise your flag, but the aftershocks ripple on, sometimes for years. That's how it felt in the months after the judge's ruling. On paper, I had won. The land was legally mine. The HOA was gutted, and Linda was facing criminal charges that could strip her of whatever wealth and influence she still clung to. But victory is never clean. The subdivision itself was scarred, its people shaken, its reputation poisoned by everything that had happened. And me? I carried the weight of the fight in my bones, the same way I carried the dust and heat of the desert long after I'd left it. In the immediate aftermath, the military pulled back its presence. No more training convoys, no more helicopters overhead. Willow Creek was quiet again, almost eerily so, as if the land itself was holding its breath. At first, the neighbors seemed relieved, but relief quickly gave way to unease. For years, Linda had been their tyrant, and while she was gone, the absence of her rule left a vacuum. People didn't know who to turn to for decisions, for order, for the endless minutiae of suburban life that had once been dictated by fines and notices. For weeks, they came to me, asking if they could repaint their fences, if they could put up swing sets. It was okay to leave Christmas lights up past January. And every time, I told them the same thing. It's your property. Do what makes you happy. That was the beginning of the shift. Freedom is terrifying when you've been trained to live under control. But once people taste it, they start to want more. The gardens that had once been rigidly manicured began to blossom in wild, colorful ways. Families painted their front doors bright colors. Kids set up lemonade stands without worrying about violations. The neighborhood slowly shed its sterile perfection and took on life again. For the first time, Willow Creek looked less like a picture from a real estate brochure and more like a place where people actually lived. Meanwhile, Linda's downfall accelerated. The financial investigation uncovered everything I had suspected and more: embezzlement, tax fraud, even a paper trail connecting her to shady developers in 3 other counties. The local news feasted on the story, painting her as the face of HOA corruption across the state. When her trial began, the courtroom was packed, not with supporters, but with homeowners from other neighborhoods who traveled just to see her get what she deserved. She was convicted on multiple counts, sentenced to years behind bars, and when the verdict was read, I saw the fight finally drain out of her eyes. For the first time, she looked small, defeated, human, and yet I didn't cheer. I didn't gloat, watching her led away in handcuffs. I just felt tired, but also lighter, as if a storm cloud that hovered over me for years had finally dispersed. Justice had been served, but it hadn't brought me joy. It had brought me closure. I thought that would be the end of it. I thought I'd finally be able to return to a quiet life on my land, tending to the soil, fixing my shed, maybe even planting a small orchard like I'd always dreamed. And for a while, that's exactly what I did. I spent my mornings walking the boundary lines, making sure every inch was secure. I spent afternoons repairing fences, repainting the barn, rebuilding what had been destroyed. Neighbors often stopped by, bringing pies or lending tools, not out of obligation but out of gratitude. For the first time in years, I felt part of the community rather than at war with it. But the story didn't stay local. The viral flag-raising video had already made waves, and as the news of Linda's conviction spread, it caught the attention of people far beyond our county. Veteran groups reached out, inviting me to speak at events. Journalists called, wanted to turn my fight into a feature story. Even lawmakers contacted me, asking if I'd testify about HOA abuses to help reform the system. At first, I resisted. I didn't want the spotlight. I didn't fight this war to become famous. I fought it because it was right. But then I thought about all the letters I received from people across the country who'd faced their own Lindas, who'd lost their homes or land to corrupt HOAs. And I realized maybe my story could do more than just heal me. Maybe it could help others fight back too. So I started speaking. Small groups at first, local veteran halls, community centers, but eventually larger audiences. I told them what happened to me, how an HOA had tried to erase my existence while I was deployed, and how I'd taken my land back without firing a single shot. I told them about the power of standing together, about the strength of community when it isn't ruled by fear. And everywhere I went, I saw heads nodding, eyes shining, fists clenched with recognition. My story wasn't just mine anymore, it was theirs too. Back home, Willow Creek transformed. Without Linda's stranglehold, the subdivision voted to dissolve the HOA entirely. In its place, they formed a neighborhood association, voluntary, transparent, and focused on community instead of control. They invited me to chair the first meeting, but I declined. This isn't my role. I told them, I'm not here to lead you. I'm here to live beside you. And that's exactly what I did. One summer evening, months after the dust had settled, I stood on my land watching the sun set over the hills. The flag still flew high over property, rippling gently in the breeze. My dog lay at my feet, and for the first time in years, the silence wasn't heavy. It was peaceful. A few kids rode by on bikes, laughing as they raced down the street. A neighbor waved from her porch. Somewhere in the distance, I heard the faint sound of music drifting through the warm air. Life, simple and unshackled, had returned. As I stood there, I thought back to the moment I came home from deployment and saw my land stolen. I remembered the rage, the helplessness, the fire that had pushed me to fight. And I realized something important. The war had never really been about dirt or fences or property lines. It had been about dignity. About proving that no one, not even a power-drunk HOA president, could strip away what I had earned through blood, sweat, and sacrifice. I don't know what the future holds. Maybe new battles will come, new challenges, new shadows to fight. But I do know this. When the day comes, I'll be ready. Because I've learned that home isn't just a place you live. It's a place you defend. And mine is finally safe.